Hey everybody, welcome back to CrashLove Gaming. We have a few Yu-Gi-Oh videos here on the channel, but most of them are either about Duel Links before it came out, or that one where I talk about games that were based on the cards, or cards based on the games. I don't know, I should revisit it actually. But I've never actually looked at the Yu-Gi-Oh video games. A lot of them are very similar, so I don't really want to do my usual style of review. Instead, I want to find out how we got from here to here. I hope you got your learning pants on. This information will be important when talking about the video games, but if you already know about the manga, Season 0, the 4, but technically 3, technically 2 different IRL card games, and all that, you can skip to the time on the screen and in the description. But you should still watch it, I worked really hard on it, thank you. Yu-Gi-Oh started in 1996 as a manga in Weekly Shonen Jump. Originally it was about Virgin Yugi solving an ancient Egyptian puzzle and gaining the ability to transform into a total chat. Also, mystical powers that can completely destroy someone's mind, and he uses these powers to ruin the lives of a bunch of high school students. I mean, some of them were asking for it. The card game, originally called Magic and Wizards, didn't show up until Chapter 9, and didn't become the main focus of the story until Chapter 60. Toei released an anime in 1998 based on the first 59 chapters. This is what's commonly referred to as Season 0, but it's actually just called Yu-Gi-Oh! In 2000, NAS and Studio Gallop released Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, a completely new series with no relation to the previous one. It's not a sequel. The first episode, Duel with Kaiba, is a condensed retelling of the Death Tea arc, and the part where they meet Yami Bakura is a much shorter and honestly worse version of the Monster World arc in the manga and the original series. By the time the original series hit TV, the manga was about a quarter of the way into Duelist Kingdom. With the card game now being the main focus and very popular with the readers, Bandai acquired the rights to release Yu-Gi-Oh merchandise, including their own card game. The rules at this point were basically throw out the biggest monster you can and use spells sometimes. After nearly a year and 3 small sets of cards, Bandai released another series of cards that were also stickers and didn't really have any stats or anything. While Bandai was releasing their card game, Konami developed and published video games based on the Yu-Gi-Oh series. Some of them included promo cards made by Konami. I'm assuming Bandai had the merchandising rights for things relating to the anime, while Konami had everything relating to the video games, including the cards that came with them. These early Konami cards were more similar to the Bandai cards than the OCG. The first series of cards from the OCG, which is the current game we all know, was released by Konami only 3 days after Bandai released their final set of cards in January of 1999. At this time, the manga was still in the finals of Duelist Kingdom. As far as I know, that means Konami took this fictional game, which was basically Dungeons & Dragons with trading cards, and gave it a concrete set of rules which are still pretty much used to this day. So that's the first 2.5 years of Yu-Gi-Oh! I didn't mean to go on for that long, but I've always been really interested in the early days. Moving on to the video games. The first Yu-Gi-Oh! Game was released on the PlayStation in July of 1998. Even though the manga was already about halfway through Duelist Kingdom, Yu-Gi-Oh! Monster Capsule Breed and Battle features the Capsule Monsters games Yugi plays with Mokuba in the manga, and whoever this is in the anime. The game is played by placing monster pieces on a grid, moving and attacking with them until either all the opponent's monsters are defeated or by attacking their gold capsule. Each monster has their own stats and abilities. It's a strategy game, kinda like Fire Emblem, but you can only use 1 unit per turn. The breed part of Breed and Battle comes from the virtual pet aspect. You can feed and train your capsule monsters to make them stronger. The monsters start as eggs, but as you raise them, they will evolve into one of over 100 monsters. There's no real story mode, but the game features 8 CPU opponents to play against. When you win, you trade one of your monsters for one of theirs. Probably the most interesting part of this game is 2-player mode, where you can battle another player using their own team from their memory card. And yes, the winner still gets to trade one of their monsters. I can imagine this ruined some friendships if the winner kept taking the loser's best monsters. The next game actually featured the card game. Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters released on the Game Boy in December of 1998. Toei's original anime series already ended, the last manga chapter was Kaiba vs Pegasus, and it would still be another month until Konami released the first set of the OCG. So how do you take a card game where you can do things like using Catapult Turtle to launch Gaia the Dragon Champion into your opponent's Castle of Dark Illusion, shattering its flotation ring, thereby causing it to collapse on top of all their monsters and convert that into a video game? You don't. In Duel Monsters, you can either summon a monster to defend or attack, or play a spell card once per turn. Get a big monster on the field, and you win. Or you can play a monster on top of another monster and hope they get fused into something bigger. The campaign follows the Duelist Kingdom arc from the manga. On the boat, you can duel Yugi, Honda, Janochi, and Bakura. On the island, you can face Insector Haga, Mai, Dinosaur Ryuzaki, Kajiki, Kaiba, Mokuba, Bandit Keith, Player Killer, and the Ventriloquist of the Dead. Oh yeah, if you haven't read the manga, you might not know who that is. Instead of whatever this thing was in the Duel Monsters anime, there was a weird dude who used a Kaiba dummy. And instead of Kaiba hacking into a satellite or whatever, I don't want to spoil it, it's a pretty cool moment actually. The next stage is the duel against Simon Murran. You might recognize him from the Millennium World arc of the manga and the anime, but that wouldn't come out for another 4 years. So either Takahashi had everything planned out well in advance and gave some spoilers to Konami, or he just liked the character and reused it later on. I really wish I had a way to find out. The last 2 stages are Pegasus and Yamayugi. Of course, none of the monsters have effects, and the characters' decks are mostly made up of filler cards, but there's not much they could have done. I don't think any of the characters played a full 40 total cards in the manga at this point. You can also link up with a friend and trade or battle, with the winner taking a card from their opponent's trunk. Again, ruining friendships. There's also a neat feature where you can fuse cards together by linking up with another copy of the game. One thing that pushed me to do an insane amount of research for this video is the instruction booklet for this game. Look at the art. Keep in mind, this is a full year before the release of Konami's OCG. Bandai's cards look nothing like this, and the only cards Konami released were promos for this game and Monster Capsule. But look at the promos. Konami had official OCG card art way before the actual OCG was a thing, and you can really tell which ones would be used later on. 6 months later, using the cover art of Manga Volume 10, Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters 2 Dark Duel Stories arrived on the Game Boy Color. And no, not that Dark Duel Stories, we'll get to that later. While being very similar to the first game, Duel Monsters 2 makes several big changes to the gameplay. First of all, the deck cost and duelist levels are introduced, making it so you can't just use passwords to get a bunch of powerful cards from the start. Attributes were added, making it so your weak water monster can take out a massive fire monster just because it's a certain color. Since the cards and the rules are still very basic in this game, I think that was a great addition, that way you actually have an answer for your opponent dropping a Blue Eyes. Ritual summons and traps were added, and you can play more than 1 card per turn. When this game came out, there were 130 cards available in the OCG and actual rules, so why didn't they use the actual rules? Maybe it was too complicated for the Game Boy Color? I don't know. I guess they were trying to be more like the anime than a simulation, but that doesn't explain why you can still fuse monsters by playing them on top of each other. The campaign still features characters from the manga, which was just entering the Dungeon Dice Monsters arc. No characters were removed, but they did add Mei and Q, Yami Bakura, Shadi, and Ishizu Ishtar. And she would make her first appearance in the manga for another few months. Not as impressive as Simon Murran's 4 years, but still pretty cool to see a character in a video game before they hit the manga. Another interesting feature is that this game had backwards compatibility with the first Duel Monsters. Cards could be traded and fused between the 2 games. I mentioned that Dark Duel Stories didn't follow the rules of the card game because maybe it was too difficult to program that for the Game Boy Color. But surely the PlayStation could do it, right? 5 months after Duel Monsters 2, Yu-Gi-Oh! True Duel Monsters Sealed Memories was released on the PS1. At this time, the manga just entered Battle City with Yugi's duel against the Exodia Rare Hunter, and the OCG was on Volume 6, which became part of the Metal Raiders set. But the thing is, Sealed Memories uses the same gameplay as the Game Boy games. There are no monster effects, and playing a monster on top of another might result in a fusion. This game even takes a step back by only letting you play 1 card per turn. Elemental type strengths and weaknesses are still here, but they're made incredibly more complicated by replacing actual elements with planets. One interesting thing about this game that I actually just learned is that it was compatible with the Pocket Station. The Pocket Station was a Japan-exclusive PlayStation peripheral, which was pretty much Sony's version of the Dreamcast VMU. You could use the Pocket Station to obtain exclusive cards in the game. The story for this game plays out like someone was trying to guess the origins of the Pharaoh and the Millennium Items. Half of it takes place in Egypt with Atem, who is not called Atem because we didn't know his name yet. And while being attacked by this Haitian character, he smashes the Millennium Puzzle to seal himself inside to allow himself to escape. This portion of the story includes ancient Egyptian versions of the main characters beyond just Yugi and Kaiba, who never existed in the manga. In the present day, Yugi and his friends take part in a card game tournament featuring characters from Duelist Kingdom. The overall goal was to defeat Haitian's guards and retrieve the Millennium Items. At the end of the game, Haitian threatens to kill Egyptian Kaiba, takes the Millennium Items from Atem, and summons Dark Knight, who seals them inside a card. After beating Dark Knight, he transformed into Nightmare. This whole thing sounds like fanfiction because at the time, the only thing we knew about ancient Egypt was what Ishizu told Yugi and Kaiba.
Oh my god, a giant rock!
Nightmare, Dark Knight, Haitian, and all of his guards are original characters created for this game, but it's not the last time they make an appearance. The next video game goes back to the Capsule game with Monster Capsule GB. It's not a remake, port, or sequel to the PlayStation game, but it does use the same rules overall. Instead of finding eggs during battle and breeding them into new monsters, you can use gacha machines to get new capsules. This game includes characters from the first 7 volumes and Duelist Kingdom, and it adds capsules based on Duel Monster cards and a story taking place after Yugi beat Kaiba in the Death Tea arc. While Kaiba was comatose due to Yugi's mind crush, he was possessed by the Millennium Ring. He invites Yugi and his friends to Duel Tower and traps the souls of his friends and Grandpa. There goes Grandpa, always getting his soul taken. Yugi has to travel up the floors of the tower, defeating bosses like Mokuba, Haga, Ryuzaki, Mai, and Kaiba himself to rescue his friends. Rather than straight up battling, Yugi has to pass mini RPG-like scenarios complete with random encounters to reach the boss. There is a lot more to this game than the PlayStation version of Monster Capsule, trading the breeding mechanics for a proper story mode. Alright, this next game was my first exposure to Yu-Gi-Oh! I saw a preview of it in a Beckett Dragon Ball Z magazine and pre-ordered it, and I had no idea how much it would affect my life. Originally released in Japan in July 2000, Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters 3 Tri-Holy God Advent keeps the general feel of Duel Monsters 2, but finally adds monster effects. It was still a long way from the OCG rules, but I still believe they are trying to stick closer to the Duel Monsters in the manga than the OCG, even though players start with 8,000 life points. The character layout is similar to what we've seen in past Duel Monsters games, with several duelists across a few stages. After beating each opponent in the stage 5 times, a new area opens up. The first 2 are based on Battle City, with Honda, Janochi, Mai, Kajiki, Yugi, Esperoba, Ryuzaki, Haga, the Exodia Rare Hunter, Pandora, and Kaiba. Stage 3 is Ancient Egypt, using characters from Sealed Memories, Simon Moran, Seto, Heishin, and Ishizu. Beating these characters 5 times each opens the final boss, Dark Knight. After beating him 5 times, a password for the Dark stage appears where you can duel Yami Yugi. You can also enter passwords to swap Yami Yugi for Marik, Yami Bakura, Shoddy, or Nightmare. I don't know why they didn't just make those characters available without passwords. The game doesn't really have that much content anyway. A new feature in this game is the ability to create your own cards from parts you receive after winning a duel, but the Japanese version lets you fuse cards by connecting with one of the previous Duel Monsters games or another copy of this game. As I mentioned, this was my first time playing anything Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it was the first Yu-Gi-Oh! Game to be localized in the West. Released as Yu-Gi-Oh! Dark Duel Stories, it was packaged with the promo cards Blue Eyes White Dragon, Dark Magician, and Exodia the Forbidden One. These were the only 3 cards I had for quite a while, and I still have them today in excellent condition. Luckily for me, because they are becoming increasingly more valuable. When this game came out in the US, the TV series was only up to the Labyrinth Brothers Duel and Duelist Kingdom, so we didn't know a lot of these characters yet. The game even kept Pandora's original Japanese name, whereas the 4Kids dub would later change it to Arcana. So in Japan, the game is called Tri-Holy God Advent, but the God cards aren't in the game at all. It was all set up for the next game. 5 months later, Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters 4 Battle of Great Duelists released in 3 different versions, Yugi deck, Kaiba deck, and Janochi deck. Each version included a god card that belonged to that version's character, except Janochi came with Ra. I guess it wouldn't have made much sense to put Marik on the cover, since at this point in the manga, we hadn't seen Marik duel or Ra in action. In-game, the god cards could only be used in their respective version, but you could only acquire them in other versions. Another difference between each version is that you assume the role of the cover character, and certain cards can only be used by certain characters. A few changes were made to the gameplay, like the graveyard being present, and trap cards no longer disappearing after a turn if they're not activated. The games seem a lot smaller overall, possibly due to there being 3 versions. There are only 2 campaign stages before the final boss, being Domino Park where Janochi dueled in Sector Haga, and the Canal where Yugi dueled Pantomime. The final boss is Pegasus, and then there's a dark stage with Mai, Bandit Keith, Yami Yugi, Yami Bakura, and Marik. There's also a secret stage with Yugi Gonbatori and Kaiser Umiuma, who I guess were V-Jump mascots. Besides the rule changes I mentioned and the addition of the god cards, this doesn't play that much differently than Duel Monsters 3. I think the strangest thing about this game is that it is the best-selling Game Boy Color game in Japan. Tri-Holy God Advent was the 4th best-selling, but I think the multiple versions and the physical god cards took this to number 1. Battle of Great Duelists was the final Yu-Gi-Oh! Game on the Game Boy Color. The next one released would be Dungeon Dice Monsters on the Game Boy Advance, followed by Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters 5 Expert 1. Yeah, the names are getting kinda silly now, huh? The Expert in the title signifies the use of the OCG's Expert rules. It was ported over as Eternal Duelist Soul just 6 months after we got Duel Monsters 3, which is confusing to me because Expert 1 came out in Japan a full year before we got Dark Duel Stories. Why didn't Konami just skip straight to Eternal Duelist Soul to help people learn the rules of the TCG? Anyway, that's pretty much the history of the early Yu-Gi-Oh! Games. If you have anything to add or would like to see a part 2 of this video, please leave me a comment and let me know. And I have to shout out my Super Crash Boys on Patreon, Jay and John Reposh. If you want to see what I've got going on Patreon or to follow me on social media at CrashLove Gaming, all the links are in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.